My manipulative brother had been stealing from our dying mother, and when I found out, I exposed him, leading her to kick him out. But he came back to steal from her again, and this time I called the cops. That's when my mother revealed a disturbing secret about him. She was suffering from lung cancer, and one day I walked in on him taking her opioid patches she desperately needed for pain relief. When I confronted him, he initially denied it, but I kept pushing until he finally snapped. "Fine. I'm stealing them," he yelled. "I do it every night. Every time she goes to bed, I walk in, kiss her goodnight, and then steal a few more. Is that what you wanted to hear?" But it didn't stop there. He had even convinced our mother that she was losing the patches herself, then pretended to help her search for them. I demanded to know why he was doing this, and he revealed that he was selling them because he owed money to some dangerous people. In his twisted logic, he rationalized that Mom was going to die anyway, so he might as well save himself. He even claimed it was what she would have wanted. That was when I lost it. I started shouting at him, calling him pathetic, cowardly, and a disgrace of a son. Our mom, frail and weak, heard the commotion and walked in at that exact moment. Her presence stopped me in my tracks, and I knew the truth would devastate her. She kept asking what was going on, but I stayed silent. She insisted, so I reluctantly told her that Jake was stealing her patches to sell them. The look of betrayal on her face was something I'll never forget. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Jake, who couldn't even meet her gaze. She asked if it was true, and he nodded, trying to explain that. He was in deep trouble and terrified, but I didn't understand what he meant by deep. I watched as her heart broke before me. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head in disbelief. A long silence followed. Jake had no explanation, no excuse. He stood there like a guilty child caught in the act. Eventually, she returned to the living room, but not before casting one final look of disappointment at Jake. I was too angry to feel any pity for him. I couldn't believe he was capable of something so vile. For the next few days, Jake and I barely exchanged words, and when we did, the atmosphere was tense and cold. I was furious with Jake, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized there had to be more to the story. Jake had always been a screw-up, but this was a new low, even for him. So I started digging, trying to figure out what was really going on. Jake had always been the kind of person who could charm his way out of anything. He was the life of the party. But charm only gets you so far. I found out that he had been spending a lot of time at a casino about an hour away from home. At first I thought he might just be blowing off steam, but then I discovered that he was gambling heavily. He wasn't just in a little bit of debt, he owed thousands of dollars to people who lingered around the casino. I guess they were loan sharks, and I knew they wouldn't just let him walk away if he didn't pay up. When I checked Mom's accounts, I noticed large sums of money had been withdrawn. The transactions were clear as day. My brother wasn't just taking her pain medication, he was also siphoning money from her account to feed his addiction. This was all happening while she was struggling to pay her medical bills. She was constantly in and out of appointments for her cancer treatment, and the co-payments were slowly but surely draining her account, especially now that she couldn't work anymore. I knew I had to confront Jake. I couldn't let him keep getting away with this, no matter what his reasons were. One night I decided to talk to him. I cornered him in the kitchen while he was making a sandwich, knowing he was a big snacker. I told him we needed to talk and laid out everything I had discovered. Jake froze, and the knife he was holding clattered onto the counter. For a moment I thought he was going to deny everything, but then he confessed. It was as if all the fight had gone out of him. He admitted to everything and apologized, saying he never meant for it to get this bad. He thought he could handle his addiction, but now he didn't know what to do. He told me that if he didn't pay his debts by next month, they would come after him. He slumped into a chair at the kitchen table and buried his face in his hands. I just stood there, staring at him. I wanted to feel sorry for him, but I couldn't. Not after what he did to Mom. I told him he needed to leave. He couldn't stay here and keep stealing from Mom. Jake didn't argue, he just nodded, looking utterly defeated. He packed up his things and left. For a brief moment I felt a small sense of relief. At least he wasn't around to cause any more trouble. But that relief didn't last long. Mom's health took a turn for the worse. The cancer was spreading, and the pain patches were no longer enough to keep the agony at bay. She was in constant pain, and there was nothing more that could be done. It crushed me to watch Mom suffer like that, and no matter how much I wanted to help, there was nothing I could do to ease her pain. She asked me to forgive Jake, but I couldn't. Every time I thought about what he had done, my blood boiled. I tried to focus on taking care of her, but the anger kept gnawing at my sanity. A few days later, late at night, I heard a noise in the house. Everyone should have been asleep, so I got up to check. What I found made my heart race. Jake was back, rummaging through the house like a thief in the night. He was frantically stuffing electronics and valuables into a bag, throwing in anything he could get his hands on. After tearing through my things, he started on Mom's jewelry and cash. I saw red. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him away from the dresser, yelling at him. He tried to apologize, begging for one more chance, saying he needed the money that night or he'd be done for. But I didn't care. I told him I was going to call the police. He pleaded with me not to, warning that the people he owed would come after us if I did. For a moment I almost believed him, but I reached for my phone and dialed anyway. Just as I was about to hit the call button, I heard Mom's voice echo down the hall. She had somehow mustered the strength to get out of bed, and she stood there, barely able to stay upright, her face twisted in pain. Seeing her like that, knowing how much she was suffering, broke something inside me. I had to protect her. I called the police, and when they arrived, they took Jake away. As they dragged him out, he looked at me with a gaze full of betrayal. With Jake in jail, the house fell silent, but the quiet was far from peaceful. Mom's condition seemed to worsen by the day, and the doctors told me there was nothing more they could do. She was hanging on by a thread, and all I could do was try to make her as comfortable as possible. One afternoon, as I sat by her bed, she surprised me by saying she wanted to spend a day together, just the two of us. I was taken aback because she had been so weak lately, but on that day she looked more energetic, more like her old self. She wanted to visit some of my favorite childhood places we hadn't been to in years. We started at the old ice cream shop downtown, the one with the worn-out booths and the bell that jingled when you walked in. The same lady who had served us when I was a kid was still behind the counter, her face more wrinkled and her hair turned gray. She handed us 2 scoops of our favorite flavors, and we sat in our usual booth by the window. For a moment it felt like I was 10 years old again, laughing with Mom as the ice cream dripped down the cone. Then, with tears forming in her eyes, she asked me to forgive her. Confused, I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. But as the tears rolled down her cheeks, she confessed something she had kept hidden for years. My father had left us when I was 5, and Jake was 3. I had never understood why he left, and I had hated him ever since. But now she revealed that he didn't leave because he didn't love us. He left because he was in deep trouble. He had a gambling problem, just like Jake. She had kicked him out to protect us from the dangerous people who were after him. When I asked why she had never told us the truth, she said she didn't want us to feel like he had chosen his addiction over us. She also didn't want us to worry. She thought that by keeping it from us, we could grow up without the pain of knowing the real reason he wasn't there. But now she realized she was wrong. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks, and I saw that Jake was following in our father's footsteps, trapped in the same cycle of addiction. Mom had tried to protect us, but it was too late. A few days later, Mom's health took a turn for the worse. I rushed her to the hospital, but it was clear that there was nothing more the doctors could do. She passed away peacefully, but the loss was unbearable. At her funeral, I stood there consumed by anger and sadness. Jake was released from jail to attend, and when I saw him, all the emotions I had been holding back came rushing out. I confronted him, telling him I couldn't believe he had done this to her. He had stolen from our dying mother. Jake looked hollow, his eyes glossed over. He tried to apologize, to explain that he had learned his lesson, but I couldn't hear it. The pain was too deep. I told him I never wanted to see him again, and I watched as his face fell even lower, but I didn't care. I turned my back on him and walked away. After the funeral, I made the decision to cut Jake out of my life for good. Weeks turned into months, and I tried to move on, but it wasn't easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom's face, the look of pain and betrayal when she found out what Jake had done. I tried to focus on anything that could distract me from the memories, but nothing seemed to help. I decided to start seeing a therapist, hoping it would help me work through the anger and pain. It did help a little, but there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of what Jake had done. No matter how much I wanted to, forgiveness seemed out of reach. I kept thinking about what Mom had said about Dad having the same problem and how she tried to protect us from it. But understanding didn't make it any easier to accept what had happened. Jake tried to reach out to me a few times, sending letters from jail. I read them, but I never responded. I knew he was sorry, but that didn't change what he had done. Eventually, the letters stopped coming. I wasn't sure if he had given up on trying to make things right, or if he had accepted that I didn't want anything to do with him. One day, I got a call from the warden at the prison where Jake was being held. He told me that Jake had been involved in a fight and was now in the hospital. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time, staring into space. A part of me wanted to rush to the hospital to make sure Jake was okay, but another part of me wanted to ignore the call and pretend it never happened. In the end, I did nothing. I didn't go to the hospital, nor did I call to check on him. A few days later, another letter arrived in the mail from Jake. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something stopped me. I opened it, and inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few words written on it. "I'm sorry. I love you. Please forgive me." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling a lump in my throat. Finally, I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I knew it was time to forgive Jake, not for his sake, but for my own. "Dear Jake, I got your letter. I've thought a lot about what you wrote and decided to forgive you. But this is the last time you'll ever hear from me. I need to move on with my life, and that means letting go of the past and letting go of you. I want you to know that I've forgiven you, and I think Mom would want me to let it go. She asked me to forgive you, and even though it's taken me this long, I'm doing it now. I hope you can find a way to move on too, to live your life in a way that would make Mom proud. I don't want anything to do with you anymore, but I want you to know you've been forgiven. I hope you can find some peace in that. Take care of yourself. Goodbye." When I finished the letter, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it to Jake. As I sealed it, I knew this was the end of the road for us. The next day, I mailed the letter. After that, I tried to keep Jake out of my mind and move forward with my life.